Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Our final broadcast for 2020, and we are doing it in style. With our guest tonight, Dr. Stephen Greer, we're going to be talking about the impact of his new film, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and what disclosure we can expect looking forward into 2021. Dr. Greer is, of course, the founder of the Disclosure Project, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI, the Orion Project, and Sirius Technology Advanced Research, LLC. His National Press Club disclosure event in May of 2001, and the webcast had 250,000 people waiting online, the largest webcast in history of the National Press Club at that time. He has worked for over 20 years to bring together scientists, inventors, and leaders in society to advance new clean technology energy systems. He is also the author of 4 books and multiple DVDs on the UFO ET subject, including the documentary Sirius. He has appeared on CBS, the BBC, the Discovery Channel, History Channel, Ancient Aliens, and the movie Thrive. His last film, Unacknowledged, an expose of the greatest secret in human history, was one of the most watched documentaries of the last 3 years. Of course, the website is CE5film.com, and I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black, the day before New Year's, Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer, good evening. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. And how are you and the family in the holidays? Everything good?
Oh, yeah. We just had our 10th grandchild born in October, so it's busy. It's been a great year in a lot of ways, even with the pandemic.
It's been a trying time for all of us, but to have 2020 now in our rear view mirror, have you ever been?
Amigos,
yes,
yeah.
right. Have you ever been more excited for a New Year's Eve?
Exactly. Yes. Well, we'll be looking forward to this moving behind us and hopefully turning a new page. It's interesting. I don't know if you saw what I sent you earlier. It was in the news today about the COVID relief bill that was signed last week, having buried in it in this 5,500-page document this mandate to move towards disclosure in the next 180 days. I don't know if you shared it with your listeners, but
I did.
I texted that to you earlier.
Yes, I did, and I was really surprised about. Well, no, I should say more happy about was the way that social media actually chose to pick up on the story. And people started to recognize what was the significance of this. What do you see? I wanted to talk about the film first, but since we jumped here, let's go here. What do you think will be in that report in 180 days?
Well, we already know. I mean, if you look at, I just recently had a conversation with the Brigadier General and another gentleman who had arranged for the whole study, that $22 million study that was authorized through the Department of Defense that went through Bigelow Aerospace. And the conversation went pretty much like this. They received nothing of substance back. They knew they were being blocked from most of the key information. And I explained that this is how the intelligence community works. So they will do a dog and pony show and then report back half-truths and partial truth back to the Congress and back to the president. So we know how this is going to go unless there's an intervention, which is what we're working on. One of the reasons I did Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind is that a couple of years ago, we knew this was coming. It was quite clear when they formed TTSA and the people who were involved, like Jim Semivan and Elizondo and others, that they were going to pivot towards a disclosure, hijack the actual disclosure, and create the false flag disclosure of there being a threat. And that has been the narrative. So we know that that's what is happening, and it's continuing to happen, including this report that went to the Senate. Now, the inside story from this Brigadier General who retired from the Pentagon and was the right-hand guy to Senator Harry Reid at the time, the majority leader from Las Vegas area in Nevada, was that this report that they were hoping to get was basically put into a cul-de-sac. That they arranged it in a way so that there would be nothing too revealing in it, except a lot of vague mentions as well as false information. And I was explaining this to the general, and he says, "Oh my God, I know we've wasted 22 million taxpayer dollars on this." So it's interesting because in this document that was just released, and this little part of this 5,500 page bill that was just signed, is this mandate for the Director of National Intelligence and the other agencies, and if you read it, Signal Intelligence, which means NSA, all of it, to do a report on this issue to get back to the Congress within 180 days. So that's 6 months from now, a little less. And unless there is something that changes, what the expectations are from the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee and other people, then I'm quite certain that it'll be partial truth combined with outright spin master falsehoods. And this is something that, from my contacts in the government, I have a home in Washington and meet with people very often there, we knew was going to happen 2 or 3 years ago, which is why, after Unacknowledged had over 600 million people see it globally, I very quickly said, we have got to bring out Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, because people are going to need to take responsibility for contact with these civilizations that are interstellar and who are visiting us, and not let it sit in the craziness of government. And that's what that whole documentary is about. By the way, people can see it for free now on Amazon Prime and Tubi and a few other places. So I hope people will avail themselves of that while we can still make it available to everyone.
How much of the report will see the light of day? How much of it will make its way into the public, or will we not see any of it? Will it remain classified?
Oh, I think some of it will be known. But I mean, what the general told me, that even when they were in the SCIF, the Secure Communication Information Facility, in the Senate where classified briefings are held, that it was basically a snapshot from 40,000 feet. And I asked him, I said, were you aware, and was Senator Reid aware, that a really important information was being left out of what they were giving you? And he says, yes, we did suspect that, which is why they did not renew the contract. And this is all inside information. I've never talked about it till tonight. So the situation with this is that, and what we're trying to do, and I have to be careful with my words here, for the last few months, there are some people very close to the Trump administration that have been back-channeling the information from the Disclosure Project and what we're doing to the president and vice president. We are very concerned that what is being worked on is a false flag type of disclosure that presents this issue as a threat that will be on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic disaster. So what I'm trying to do is to be sure that the incoming president, and there's a member of my team who grew up with Mr. Biden, and the outgoing president, whoever ends up taking any action on this, should it happen, are informed properly. Because what we learned, and I had it confirmed to me from people inside the White House a couple of months ago, is that both the president and the vice president had people going into the White House providing them with a very frightening scenario regarding the extraterrestrial issue, that Mr. Trump and Mr. Pence absolutely know that we're being visited, but they have been convinced it's a national security threat. And so I put a group on retainer in Washington to get this information to the president and to the vice president and to their senior-most people. What we're waiting to see is that if they take any action between now and January 20th, and I can't tell you whether that will happen or not. This isn't, literally today I was going back and forth with these folks in Washington. And those people are very senior. They have direct access to the vice president and the president. And as you know, the vice president is the chairman of the Space Council, which under Obama and Biden had pretty much been disbanded, and then it was reformed. And so the vice president traditionally was chairman of that. And so this issue was mostly given to the portfolio for the vice president in the last couple of years. Unfortunately, the same people who went out publicly through the TTSA group or their colleagues were going into the White House, and what was happening with the mainstream media, where they were portraying this as a national security threat and some kind of invasion of our airspace, et cetera, and so on. Something more virulent and negative, speaking of viruses, was being done inside the White House. So we're trying to fix that problem, and we're also reaching out to the senior members of the Senate and the House about this, because what we're concerned about is that this is what they're stepping the game up on, is to give some official cover to further disclosures that will be presented in a false narrative of threat. And that, of course, always benefits the military-industrial complex and the warmongers and all the, beltway bandits around Washington. But what I'm trying to get the public to understand is, no matter what happens there, this really rests in the hands of the people. Obviously, I have to do more than one thing at a time, but the public needs to understand that the relationship between the human species and these other civilizations really needs right now to be centered in people who are conscious, peaceful, enlightened, open-minded, unprejudiced, to make contact with them. And that's really what the ETs are waiting for. Everybody said, what are they waiting for? I said, well, they're waiting for enough critical mass of humanity to reach out to them and be aware of their presence, but not in a way that puts us on a war footing.
Is this the message? Well, let me jump in, Dr. Greer, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
Is this the message that you're using the retainer for to get to President Trump and Vice President Pence? Is it that verbiage?
Yes, well, there's several. Part of it is the basic information. Then it's also explaining how they've been deceived,
right?
Including, for example, they are being told, and so is Senator Rubio, who's chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. I know for a fact, I know the people who are in there doing this, and who are very high up in the party, the Republican Party, as well as the Democratic Party, in terms of Dick Durbin of Illinois, Senator Durbin. And what I'm being told is that there is a consistent spin towards negativity. At the same time, they keep asserting that we don't know how these things operate. For example, you'll see that the TTSA group has had a man from, I'm blocking on his name right now, from the Lockheed Concourse saying, well, we really need to study this more to see how these things operate. Meanwhile, the people I have on my team have been working directly on man-made UFOs that are launched out of the high desert of California and other places frequently. And there is an entire classified Air Force, as it were, with these sort of technologies that are so-called anti-gravity systems and propulsion systems. But that's not what they're being told. They're being told, and this is very important, that we don't have that. Why? They want to be sure that the leaders do not know that those covert assets exist. So when those assets are used to stage an attack or an event, they can all blame it on the, quote, aliens. And I've been told this very specifically. This is a very big, chessboard that's been spread out here, unfortunately. And these guys have stepped up the pace. This is why in 30 years of me being involved with this, I don't remember, I briefed Clinton CIA director in December of 1993. And this is the worst, the most dangerous, the most fraught period I've ever seen in terms of them launching through the mainstream media, through external groups like TTSA, and inside the White House and inside up on Capitol Hill, this false narrative.
You and I, this year, we've done lots of interviews together, and we've also done a few things outside of Fade to Black that the audience may not know about. But we have certainly watched this year together develop. But did you anticipate on the night before New Year's, you and I being on the air and talking about TTSA possibly pulling up stakes and folding it up? Did you see that coming earlier in the year when you and I were talking?
Oh, yeah, I knew that about 2 or 3 years ago. In fact, I have people who are inside the intelligence community who told me when that whole operation launched that it was on a TikTok to extinction. And so, yes, I knew that. In fact, I said as much about 2 or 3 years ago when that first emerged. So none of that is surprising at all. Actually, it's all anticipated because that needs to be back down where they stand up this more official channel through the Congress and through the White House. So this is how the sort of acculturation and desensitization and propaganda machine operates. So, no, this was completely anticipated. In fact, I have an email from a rather senior CIA official saying exactly that.
The future of TTSA, because of their position, and I'm going to speak very directly here, from me looking from the outside in, that they were trying to control disclosure and control the narrative. If that goes away, where is that information going to start to flow from?
It's going to start flowing from these reports. Yes, what I'm saying.
Right.
What I just sent out today. That was first broke on Fox News, and then it's gone through social media. This little buried gem inside this COVID relief bill that's 5,500 pages is that it's on a launch, a 6-month launch, where they're going to, unless the public intervenes and unless we intervene also inside the system, which is why, I'm working very, very hard on things I can't really talk about a lot of details because I'd burn all my bridges, but inside, both the outgoing administration and the incoming administration, as well as on Capitol Hill, to try to give advice and information that isn't based in all this fear-mongering and sort of ramping up to conflict. Because, for 25 years, I've spoken very openly about the fact that, and of course, Wernher von Braun on his deathbed, the guy who invented the rocket, for heaven's sakes, stated on his deathbed to Carol Rosin that, in fact, they were going to have all these different wars, and eventually the trump card they would play would be that there is an alien threat that we need to unite the world against and fight. That has been the long-term 60-year agenda that they have been building up to, and unfortunately, it looks like, unless there's an intervention by humans, by us, not by the ETs, that is the path they're going to stay on. So we have to, really, I think everyone listening needs to understand that they need to do two things. They need to help us get to the right people who are in government if they have those contacts. We need the right whistleblowers to start coming forward in larger number. And we need to make our CE5 contact teams. And there's an app that's called CE5 Contacts you can get to train yourself in all the techniques to make contact with these civilizations, and they work. In fact, a couple of days ago, Demi Lovato and Kesha, I think her name is, we're doing a podcast together talking about this. And I'm really trying to encourage people from all walks of life to get involved, but also some of these influencers in social media to get the information out, because we really need to reach what we talk about in the movie, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, this 1% effect, where 1% of the human race goes into higher states of consciousness, but actually takes direct action to be a person who makes peace and contact with these civilizations, because in consciousness, the field of consciousness, that will shift the other 99%. And we really need to do this because we're running up against this launch. And it isn't going to happen. They've already pulled the trigger, is what I'm telling you. This thing is coming down the tracks where, sort of the trial balloon that they did through the mainstream media and TTSA and the Tic Tac sighting and the Navy jets, that was just to get the mainstream media to start talking about it. Now they're going to do this bigger project where it'll be an official investigation. And, of course, whatever they release to the public on it are going to be controlled leaks with this very specific threat narrative attached to it, which could drag the entire planet into a war footing if we're not careful. So I think that this is what I've known about for a very long time, that we've talked about. You've heard me talk about it for 20 years.
Yes.
I think we're now watching this unfold right before our eyes, but people shouldn't be fatalistic. This is actually all in play. All of it's in play. And so the actions each of us take in 2021 can determine the outcome. So the outcome is indeterminate, but it's going to be a better outcome if there are more people who act in an enlightened, peaceful way, but also who take very specific direct action. People should be writing their members of Congress and senators saying, we're aware this is going on. You need to get information from the Disclosure Project. You need to get honest brokers in there who can guide you through this. And actually, I have offered to this Brigadier General and the consulting group who's doing some of this with the Senate to do that, so that they get some accurate information and perspective and not half-truths and cover-ups. Because I know that that's what the $22 million we as taxpayers spent. The general was very specific with me in saying that it just did not, and they knew that they weren't getting the truth out of that. So, this is how the intelligence community operates. They'll set up something that looks like they're going to put out something and come clean. In reality, there's one part truth and three parts disinformation, false information, spin, or outright lies. So it's like this narrative that you keep hearing that, gee, we don't know what these things are. We don't know how they operate. Well, this is utter nonsense. And the comical thing about this, Jimmy, is that if you look at the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and also Unacknowledged, we have a letter from Ben Rich, who wrote the book Skunk Works, who was the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, the top secret, top aerospace engineering outfit that works on a lot of these covert systems. And it was a back and forth letter between Ben Rich in 1986 and one of his friends. And his friend had written and said, are these UFOs ours or extraterrestrial? And the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works writes back in his handwriting, signed, and on his letterhead, we have it. It's in the book, Unacknowledged. Go read it. And it says they're both. They're extraterrestrial and ours. And so that was 86. And they had been around for 30 years before then. Now, of course, 86 is, we're looking now up, 34 years ago, more than a third of a century. So you can imagine the kinds of refinements that have gone on in those energy and propulsion systems, but also weapon systems. And here's the part that's very, very risky, is that because of the sort of doubling factor of technological research and development that happens every few years, with the kinds of money that have been going into classified research in this area, black budget stuff, unacknowledged special access projects. What you have now are systems that, to most people who are in the Pentagon, the White House, and the Congress, never mind the American public, they are capable of launching an event or having events happen and totally make it look like it was, quote, the aliens did it, when it isn't.
Yeah, I'm nervous about that.
It's going to happen if we don't stop it. It's going to happen.
I'm nervous about that. And there's one other thing. I've got 30 seconds before the break, so you can answer this quickly. Sure. Why not invite Marco Rubio to a CE5 evening? Right?
Well,
why can't that happen?
Well, we might, but I mean, we have to first at least get a baseline of understanding, what we call a fund of knowledge and perspective. Because look, there are people who've been going up there now for a long time, providing really wrong information that have brainwashed our leaders. So we're not starting at a blank slate here. We're starting in the hole, and we need to fix this problem. And that's why I'm working with some really great people on both sides of the aisle who understand what's really at stake here, and we can just hope and pray that we can reach the right people and so that they're not fooled by this nonsense.
Let's take our break right here. Our guest tonight, this is our last broadcast for 2020, Dr. Stephen Greer. We are doing it right. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. Stay with us. More with Dr. Greer when we come back. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can follow Dr. Greer at Dr. Stephen Greer on Twitter. We've got all the links up. And, of course, the website is CE5Film.com. And this is our 2 days away from New Year's Eve, but our last show of 2020. And Dr. Greer, the $1 million question is the obvious one. You're there in Washington, D.C. We've got one administration moving out, another one coming in. What can we expect with disclosure in 2021 that will be different with the new administration?
Well, I don't think we're done yet with the current one, and this is the next 3 weeks or so until January 20th. There could be quite a few surprises coming. So, I have my sources who give me direct information from inside the White House and who have been, very reliable. For example, they alerted me to the resignation of the Secretary of Defense 3 days before anyone in the world knew it. So that, so what I'm hearing is that things are still very much in play, even in the current administration. So let's bracket that for a minute. Now, in terms of the new administration, we do know, a lot of people don't remember this probably, that the incoming president had been chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And we had provided a briefing to him and a briefing document back a number of years ago around the time of the Disclosure Project. He then, of course, subsequently became vice president for President Obama. And so, he certainly had been made aware of this issue. The question is, will his team move in the direction of what every other president has done, and that is either go along with the secrecy or go along with putting it out there in a way that is xenophobic, terrifying, etc. We don't know yet. And so, what we're trying to do is, with the contacts we do have to the current administration, is to get them the same information and perspective that we're doing for the outgoing. We've also provided that information to the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. So the people on my team have direct access to Vladimir Putin, to the incoming president, outgoing president, and to key members of Congress. So what we're trying to achieve is to get these various leaders informed with the truth as opposed to half-truths, and to give them a perspective. So I wrote a draft speech that's gone with the briefing document for the incoming president, the outgoing president, and Mr. Putin, that sort of frames the issue in a hopeful way, in a way that discusses that we need to have a peaceful presence in space, that we keep weapons out of space, and that we have an initiative where the Space Force that the current administration has formed is turned into an agency for preserving space for peace and making open contact with these civilizations a safe arena, and create a safe arena for that to happen. Now, I think that's completely achievable, frankly. I know people go, really? I go, yeah, it really is. But it can't be achieved if the people who are in leadership positions, the only information and perspective they get is a false one or a partial truth one. And so this is why, some people, I disappear out of public eye for weeks and a couple months at a time. But I've been sort of overwhelmed with this, to be quite frank with everyone, over the last 3 or 4 months. But we're doing the best we can with what we have. And we can just hope that, we're able to get this information to them, because the incoming administration is going to inherit what's in this bill, this COVID bill, that mandates this report in 180 days. So from the time Mr. Biden becomes president, he'll have less than or about 5 months before that information, which is probably going to be designed along the lines of what we were seeing TTSA do, but through an official channel through the government. And, we have to be sure that our leaders aren't manipulated. Let me give you one example how what the stakes are here.
Sure.
Some years ago, I was asked to brief one of the generals who at the time was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Patrick Hughes, and he was a 3-star general. He asked me and a couple of my military advisors to come to the Pentagon to brief him, because they knew we had a lot of information from hundreds of top secret witnesses, that we had interviewed over the years, over the decades. But I found out the reason we were called in there was because the general had tried to find out information on this subject and had been blocked. And what it meant was that, and he admitted this, he had no operational readiness. What does that mean? It means that if something were to start happening that looked like a UFO event, he wouldn't know who it was. Was it China? Is it Russia? Is it what is it? So he was in an information vacuum, even though he was one of the top intelligence, in fact, the top intelligence official in the Pentagon. So this is dangerous, because what you have people who do know about this issue, who are part of this cabal of sociopaths, because you don't get into that system unless you've been cleared to go along with the agenda of secrecy, endless war, etc. And then you have the people who may be in charge of a major agency like the Defense Intelligence Agency, who knows nothing if they're not one of the chosen ones that they've deigned to give a briefing to. So this is what happens consistently. But what that means is the members of Congress, the president, people at the Pentagon, and other officials would be caught flat-footed with a false flag type event. Now, in 1997, and this story I haven't told very often, we did something after I had sort of, we discovered that the Clinton administration wasn't going to touch this issue with the 10-foot pole, because they were afraid to push on it. So we had these initially private briefings from members of Congress, and it was in D.C. in April of 1997. Now, at that meeting, the day before that meeting, we all gathered, and astronaut Edgar Mitchell was there, and the first initial dozen or so of these military witnesses were there. And one of them was a man who had been on an interagency committee back in the 70s, and this is what he said, I'm paraphrasing, but pretty close to what he said. They had a system set up in the early mid-70s where you could push a button and there would be deployed all these objects that look like alien spacecraft that could do all manner of havoc. And he said literally everyone from the president on down would believe it was ET. So that, he said, had been in place for quite a while before he got there in the 70s. So I think that what the public has to begin to realize is that knowledge is power, that all of us trying to get the truth about this out would be dispositive, which would be protective from us being victims of a surprise event where our leaders get stampeded into doing something stupid, like when we went into Iraq after 9/11 and Dick Cheney and his minions concocted that there were all these weapons of mass destruction there, which everyone knew didn't exist. So I think that, of course, $2 trillion later, and God knows how many hundreds of thousands of people dead, here we are. So I think we have to be proactive. We have to take action, both on the fronts of educating our leaders and the public, but also informing our CE5 contact teams so that there is another side of humanity, a peaceful, enlightened, conscious side of humanity being shown to these civilizations. And they really need to see that from us.
With I've got two questions. I'm going to try to get them both in. This year, President Trump a few times was asked about UFOs, skated the issue, right? But for a sitting president to have that question laid out in front of him, I was very surprised to see things get to that level. If President-elect Biden is confronted again by Fox or somebody else with the same question, what do you think his response would be?
Oh, I think he'd brush it aside, because that's what Obama did also, and that's what they're told to do. And one of the things people don't understand, everyone thinks that the president is some omnipotent figure. In reality, they're very vulnerable to who's around them, what they're providing. As Truman said, and Bill Clinton repeated it, the White House is the crown jewel of the federal penitentiary system. So people have a very incorrect understanding. For example, just because a president may be briefed on a subject doesn't mean he has control over it. People conflate those two things. So there could be a partially true, partially false briefing that a leader receives, but that doesn't mean that these black, unacknowledged special access projects are actually going to be responsive to a presidential order. In fact, they would not be. So they view themselves as above the law and a power within their own right. And this is, of course, something that, we sort of begin to discuss in the documentary Unacknowledged, which, by the way, is also on Amazon Prime and some of these other sites like Tubi. But what the public needs to really understand is that most of these people in Washington know less about this subject than most of your listeners. And that lack of knowledge is very dangerous, because then the only people who normally get access to these leaders are the foxes guarding the hen house. These are the people who are professional disinformation agents and, frankly, liars. So this is very dangerous in a democracy, because what it does is it basically negates the power of our officials and makes them all very vulnerable to whoever is in the system to give them information, because they have to work through intermediaries. So what I'm trying to do, and I've been doing this for a long time, but we've really picked up the pace in the last 3 or 4 months, is to get this information to people, because we know what's being launched. I got a heads up on it 2 or 3 years ago. The reason we crowdfunded, and I want to thank everyone who contributed to CE5Film.com. I think we've raised about $915,000 to make the documentary and get the word out about it. And we have a goal to raise a couple $100,000 more, but we haven't met that yet. Is that if we don't reach enough people with this message of what the truth is, and we leave our leaders and the public vulnerable, they'll be able to pull another Iraq War / 9/11 stunt, but on a much larger global scale. So, the future, everyone's so passive, but they need to understand this is not the time for passivity. This is a time for leaning into the wind and charging forward in a positive way, putting up true information and taking good action, and particularly this 1% effect, where the studies in quantum physics are quite clear. When you reach 1% of coherence in a quantum field experiment, and this is true of consciousness even more so, it shifts the entire other 99%. And so if we can come together and do this as a public, and this is why I've been welcoming people like Demi Lovato and other celebrities who've been putting information out about Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and particularly the CE5 Contact app, that's the name of it, CE5 Contact, is that it trains people, but it also has a feature where if you're in a little town in Arkansas, you can see who is in your area, who is in the system, and then message them and form your own team. So we're trying to create as many we really need about 70 or 80 million people doing this globally. That's 1% of the population. In America, it's about 3 million people. So that's what we're trying to do on a grassroots basis. But everyone can also be sending the Disclosure Project information to their members of Congress and their senators. There are a lot of people on Capitol Hill, frankly, very aware of this, increasingly aware of this issue because it's been in the mainstream media for the last couple of years quite a bit. But they're all being provided as much more disinformation than they are information. They're given more falsehoods than they are truths. And this is, of course, exactly how, unfortunately, quote unquote, good counterintelligence works. It's, you basically put a little bit of truth that is around the sort of like poison pill, but inside the poison pill is the poison. And that is how they operate. And it's really time that the public, hold our officials accountable for listening to them about this issue now that it's going more and more mainstream.
Now, how do you see the false flag alien invasion playing out? What would the tech be behind that? And the only reason why I'm asking directly is I think it would only last the impact of it for a few minutes. Once people start shooting up in the sky, right, and they're not shooting down actual alien craft, then the impact would be short-lived if it's some kind of holographic projected image. What tech would we use for a false flag alien invasion?
Well, I'm sure they have I know what they have.
What do they have?
They have operational UFOs, things that look like ET spacecraft of all shapes and sizes that can be deployed and that have onboard systems that are weapon systems. They have electromagnetic warfare devices that they can deploy that would make planes just drop out of the sky. I have a man who worked in an unacknowledged project in the technology management office who described in great detail how we took down most of Saddam Hussein's Air Force, and it wasn't through dogfights and shooting them. It was by switching on this satellite system, and all of his Air Force, they would clear the airspace of our assets, and they just dropped out of the sky and crashed. A lot of people don't know this, but that was a satellite deployed system, very classified. And there's an updated version of it that was launched a few years ago, and that was developed at the Marshall Space Flight Center down in Alabama. So, I have, almost 1,000 people, 900 and some people like that who provided me documents and information on this. So we know that there's a whole spectrum of systems that are not holograms, but real technologies that could be deployed to look like, hell on wheels. So I think that the only way that can be countered is that the people in the Pentagon who aren't read into this issue and the politicians and the public, all of them, know that capability exists. And by the way, that's why the people going into the White House and into the Senate Intelligence Committee meetings, as well as in the mainstream media from folks like at the TTSA, consistently say, we don't know how these operate. It can't be our technology. It must be some foreign thing. They always make that point. Why? Because that is the heart of the deception, is that if the public and our leaders don't know that these technologies have been in development since the 40s or before, then it's very easy, frankly, to deceive somebody because they don't know. It's like, is it what Ben Rich said? Is it what are these UFOs? Are they ours or are they extraterrestrial? And of course, Ben Rich very correctly said they're both. Some are ours and some are extraterrestrial. But if you only think that they're alien and these things start doing mischievous things, all right, these objects start doing mischievous things, then everyone's going to leap to the assumption and the conclusion that it's alien and as opposed to man-made. So that is one of the reasons why in every one of those press conferences, in all the statements that have come out from Marco Rubio, Senator Rubio, the Senate Intelligence Committee chairman, and elsewhere, they go, we don't know what these are, we don't know how they operate, because the people going up to the Senate and to the New York Times and CNN are saying this as sort of a mantra over and over again, and it's not only a lie but a damn lie.
Right.
Because by putting that out there, it preserves the element of surprise. So that if they pull the trigger on a false flag operation, everyone's going to think, well, it's got to be ET, right? Well, no, it doesn't, because they're not being truthfully told the whole story. So what I've been trying to do is I'm literally sending schematics and images of what the Skunk Works have developed, what Northrop Grumman has developed, and other aerospace giants that are classified aircraft. We have a huge archive on this. And so what I'm trying to say to them is, don't be tricked and fooled by something that happens when many of these events that have been, in the past, we can prove have in fact been man-made objects. For example, everyone in the UFO world knows about the Cash Landrum incident. You've
Sure.
heard of it?
Sure.
Do you know that was a mishap by a human-piloted craft?
It seems that way. I mean, the more that I have looked at case.
We have direct testimony of it.
Right.
Direct testimony of it.
No, I'm saying what was released to the public and what we know about it, it felt like it could have been our technology without knowing any inside information. Well, let me ask you this before we get to the break. Are you suggesting that the Tic Tac was not ET, and that may have been a false flag type of operation? It was our own technology, backwards engineered or not?
Yeah, it was most likely from the Lockheed Skunk Works. And the aerospace people I work with have confirmed that. Now, the flyboys, the Navy jet pilots, they wouldn't have been read into that. And to them, it's a UFO, right?
Right.
Because, see, this is the danger of secrecy. If people don't know, they're going to make assumptions that are false. So for anyone to study this issue at all, they got to know the sort of kindergarten level of this is that there are two classes of things zipping around out there. Some are ours, some are extraterrestrial. And if you don't know the distinction between them, you're going to be fooled. So that like the lesson day one of kindergarten. But you have people who are not getting that information. They're being told the exact opposite. Oh, we have no idea how. This is why I was so upset when the TTSA guy who had been the Lockheed Skunk Works
Steve Justice.
Yeah, repeatedly said that. And he's either the least informed person in the world on this subject, or he is a professional counterintelligence liar. Those are your two choices. There's no other choices there. You're either uninformed or deceiving people.
Let me ask you this. I've got 3 minutes before the break. If a false flag alien invasion or incident happens, is this a worldwide incident? And if it is, what other countries are in on it with us?
Well, I mean, as I've said many times, the organization that is running these unacknowledged projects is global. It's not just U.S.
Right.
It's always been global. So it could be global, or it could just be one event anywhere that gets a lot of press attention. For example, 9/11 happened in two places, basically three if you count the Pennsylvania crash, and that was New York City and Washington, the Pentagon. But it became a global event, right? Galvanized the whole world. So particularly when you have the media willing to take basically dictation from the intelligence community. You know, one of the interesting things in the movie Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind was when Daniel Sheehan, the civil rights and constitutional attorney, said, look, when I was doing the Pentagon Papers, we saw a document that listed 42 people who were the senior editors of the major media around the world that were all on the payroll of the CIA. And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a fact. And so the media, that's why they covered all the TTSA material so much and won't cover the Disclosure Project, because the Disclosure Project goes, quote, too far. I've been told this by editors. It goes too far in exposing the truth. But partial and half-truths are very dangerous.
Let's take our break right here. Dr. Gurr, fascinating conversation. We've got so much more to do. We'll get it all in this next segment. And I want to remind everybody that, yes, this is our last broadcast for 2020. We are doing it the right way with Dr. Stephen Greer. When we come back after the break, I want to talk about disclosure, its definition, and the impact of close encounters of the fifth kind. All that and much more when we come back. Stay with us. This is Fade to Black. All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. Our last show of 2020. And our guest tonight, Dr. Stephen Greer. Great conversation tonight, Dr. Greer. I want to just back up a little bit before we move forward.
Sure.
With a fake alien invasion, what do you anticipate the reaction would be with the public? Are we going to deal with like a War of the Worlds situation with H.G. Wells, or it would be hopefully more sublime? What would the reaction be like?
Well, unfortunately, I'm afraid it'd be the former, and there'd be a great deal of panic because, it's interesting. Robert Kennedy Jr. Did a video not long ago, and he was talking about how Hitler, during the Nuremberg trials, his propaganda officer was asked, "How did you actually pull this off?" He says, "Fear. We just created one thing after another that induced fear. In that fear, people take leave of their rational selves and their spiritual selves. They just want to feel safe, and they give all the power to the state." And it was a very interesting sort of show that or video that Robert Kennedy Jr. did, and that is, of course, what happens is that they will set up a situation, create fear and panic, and then exploit it. Okay, so that is how demagogues and people who want to have a great deal of power, whether they're religious demagogues, political demagogues, military dictators, they always do that. So that would be the objective of it. And this is what Wernher von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, warned about in the last months of his life. I think that the problem is the public has very short historical memory. And, we move on with our lives after something like 9/11 or World War II or the Holocaust, and people forget the big lessons. And I think we need to remember the lessons of history so that we don't repeat them. And one of the big lessons is don't give in to the fear and panic. Look to what the actual truth is. And most importantly, become an ambassador from humanity to these civilizations and find out for yourself. Because ultimately, they can only get away with this kind of trickery and manipulation if people are not informed and don't know. And that's why, I said earlier, knowledge, in the Vedas, it says knowledge is the great purifier. It's knowledge is power. But if they keep people ignorant, including our leaders and the general public, and people are only getting their information from mainstream media and big media sources, then it's very simple to manipulate the masses in whatever direction they want to go in. And unfortunately, we're even seeing this happening with big tech, where the technology companies have begun to, in social media, ban and shadow ban and block differing opinions, even if some of them are odious opinions. I think that there is a problem with the means of communication being corrupted by people who take on a false narrative and think they're doing the right thing when they're not. So we have to all be vigilant, is what Eisenhower said in his last speech before he left the presidency. But we're at the military-industrial complex. It takes a vigilant and informed citizenry, as he put it, to maintain democracy and freedom. And I think this is a very important point that people need to think about as we move forward. I am still working very hard to try to see if this freight train coming down the track of this sort of fake disclosure, this false disclosure, can be averted. And I think it can be if we can get the right information and evidence to the right decision makers. So that's what I'm working on a lot. And we need people's help to do that. And that's why people's contributions help a lot, because some of these outfits we have to put on to help us do this, they're not all doing it for free, frankly, to be honest with you. So people wonder where, some of the revenue that comes in from things we're doing, that's where it's going, because we've got to get this done. And if it doesn't happen, we have to move this out of the hobbyist field of ufology to something that's extremely serious and done very well.
You just brought up disclosure, and for so many, the vast majority of not only the community but the world, disclosure to them is the head of state, the president of the United States, stepping up to a microphone on a live feed. We're not alone. There's that side. For you, when it comes to disclosure, what would have to happen for you to sit back and go, that was disclosure? What is it that you would expect?
I would expect the numerous leaders in the world to issue a statement and make a speech similar to what I've drafted. And a version of it was released a couple years ago, actually, to the public, if you follow my social media and email chain. And what it would say is, we're not alone. We've known this for quite some time. It's been kept secret, and that was a mistake. And we want to bring this forward now. And the message should be hopeful and should say that we have amazing technologies that we can begin to move out to the public that would fix the environmental problems of the planet, as well as poverty around the world would be ended in a generation. And we are going to start a global initiative to peacefully make contact and increasingly open relationships with these civilizations. That is what it must be. If it's anything else, if it moves in the direction of, well, there's some that are good and some that are bad, and we need to have war in space and weapons in space, we're done. Because none of these civilizations that are interstellar are going to play that game. So, we're going to be shadow boxing ourselves. So I think that it's very important that for the future of this planet and the human species, that this be handled very wisely, which it has not been. The secrecy was a mistake, and many people I've spoken to who have been involved in those programs admit that. I remember Senator Barry Goldwater, who ran for president in '64 against Johnson, and then John McCain took his seat. I was sitting at his home in Paradise Valley in Scottsdale back in the 90s. And, he said, excuse my language, he said it was a goddamn mistake then and a goddamn mistake now that this was ever kept secret. So this is, the opinion is very strong on that. But how do you bring this out? Well, if it's brought out in a way that is fear-mongering, we're going to really throw the whole world into a state of fear and panic, much worse than the COVID-19 crisis. Some of the things that have happened with COVID, I think, are some of the overreaches of secrecy, of panic that have been induced. I believe is a social engineering experiment to see to what extent they can control the masses.
I agree.
And it's a lot of it's very abusive. It's a very serious virus. It's particularly bad for people in certain demographic groups who are elderly. In Canada, 80% of everyone who's died have been in nursing homes and rest homes. So why aren't we protecting those people properly? And in America, we've tested 1 million college students or more. 70,000 were positive for COVID, 0 deaths. So we're not deploying our resources properly. I'm not going to go into that for any length, but some of what's happening seems to be a way to see, let's do edicts from on high, create enough fear, and see if the public will go along with it, whether it's scientific and makes any sense or not. So I think that is a really bad precedent. And I think that they're watching this. The intelligence community is watching that to see if that could be learned from for doing the next phase of sort of this global dominion, this domination around a sort of a totalitarian control of the public. And I think that anyone who cares about the future has to be concerned of this emergence of what has been rather covert totalitarianism becomes extremely overt, where it becomes a more overt system of totalitarianism and frankly, fascist.
Yeah, and we found out the power in the immediacy of social media because the reaction was global in a nanosecond, right? And that's a powerful, powerful tool for those out there that want to use it to realize how effective it is. I wanted to ask you this: when how do I say this correctly? When disclosure starts to leak out, and it's I don't want to say this in a negative way, but when disclosure leaks out, is it a situation where governments now have to answer questions about possible lying with what they knew in the past? Is that something that is going to push things forward instead of being able to come cleanly?
Well, the question presupposes an honest and free press and media, which is not the case. So in a perfect world, the fourth estate, the media, would actually be doing their job. They're not. You know, this was very interesting. In the mid-'90s, early mid-'90s, I was up in New York, and I was at one of these salons. You know, all these highfalutin people come, and I was there presenting this issue. And the UN Secretary General's wife was there, all kinds of people. And what was interesting, after we sat with this elderly gentleman who had been on the board of Time Life, which of course became AOL, Time Warner, and then CNN. But he said, look, he was talking about the media. We've all become, and I'm quoting, scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king, meaning these big, powerful interests. He says, there is no free press. And he was very blunt. Schwartz was his name. And I went, yes, I understand that. But he gave me granular details on this. And I went, well, this is really bad. So the public, you know, it's sort of like the public believes the fiction that if it's in the New York Times or on CNN or even allowed to go viral on social media, that it's true. And that isn't the truth. So like a lot of the information I put out has been shadow banned. We've had things taken down, blocked. You know, it happens every day. I have a whole team of people trying to fix this every single day. So I think that the problem with the public is that they sort of have believed that, you know, tell a lie, tell it often. It's very Orwellian. Oh, that there was the land of the free. We have a free press. If it were true, they'd know about it. So your question assumes that the media that most people get their information from would actually pursue the right questions, when in reality, they're going to cherry pick what they're going to say and ask. So now, in terms of anyone who was to be, as this becomes more and more mainstream, the only way they can explain the criminal secrecy, which is what it's been, is criminal, would be to say, well, the truth is so terrible, we were protecting you from the horrible alien truth. So that's the fig leaf they're going to put on this criminal enterprise known as the Majority Intelligence Committee, MAGIC, and all the unacknowledged special access projects. So, you know, some years ago in 1999, I wrote a paper called When Disclosure Serves Secrecy. People should go to our website, seriousdisclosure.com, look that paper up, find it, because it's very prescient. It talks about everything we're seeing happening right now. It was written 21 years ago.
I look at it like this. I want to talk about your last two films. Unacknowledged was a primer for those out there new to the subject, and it allowed them to flow into CE5, which is definitely hard-hitting. You need to see one film for those outside of the community I'm speaking to, and bring in the masses with unacknowledged and then CE5. Has the message been effective? And if not, what would you have done different in CE5?
Oh, it's been very effective, and that's why, it's the number one, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. It's the number one on iTunes, on Amazon. It's trended very high on Amazon Prime, and it's attracted a lot. I mean, I got a message from all manner of walks of life, from scientists to military witnesses to the general public, but also some of these celebrities who, like Demi Lovato and others, who can really help get the word out. And the reason that's important is, I have a certain number of social media followers, maybe 1 million or something. Demi Lovato's got 100 million, all right? So that's how you reach this 1% effect. And so one of the things we're talking about is doing something with a number of these influencers where we go out into the desert and we have, 8 or 10 of these people who are very well-known public figures, and we do a CE5 together, and they're putting it out on their social media, and that pulls in 200, 300, 400 million people. So we're actually when all the lockdowns and things, can be lifted, that's what we're going to plan to do.
And what about the next film? Are you going to take things to the next level? Like I said, unacknowledged, the primer, right? CE5. Now you're graduating high school, right? Getting into the heavy stuff. What's the next film?
The next one that has already been it's in development, and it's going to be the largest one of all, and it's going to be a tour de force of the last 100 years of the secrecy, but specifically the exotic technologies. And, I refer to this in the other documentaries. I use the term the lost century. We're 100 years of lost conscious evolution, social evolution, and technological evolution. So the world that we have is a faint shadow of what it should have been, but also can be very quickly if we come together to bring out this next generation of science and technology that is really the heart of the secrecy. The heart of the secrecy isn't the ET issue. It's the science and technology story. But that requires an entire feature film and possibly a whole series. We're thinking of doing something like where we would have the disclosure files, where we would have, a 10, 20, 30 part series that would dive into all this stuff deeper and deeper and deeper. Because I think that the appetite in the public is ready for that. And there are enough people who now, the silver lining of the sort of disinformation that's come out through the mainstream media on the UFO subject is that a lot of people are aware of it now, and a lot of people know it's real and they're taking it seriously. They may not understand the fine details. So there's a big appetite, and I know that the big streaming platforms like Netflix and HBO and a lot of the others have been reaching out to me about this, about doing a whole really high quality in-depth series. But the next one is going to be very much focused on that, so that people understand what's at the heart of the secrecy. But the beautiful part of it at the end will be, here is the world that is waiting for us. It's sort of like when Colonel Corso was told by the ET, and the Colonel Corso said, "What's in this for me?" And the ET said, "A new world, if you can take it." It's beautiful. So the world that we can portray in that film will be a glimpse into what we could have had decades ago, but which can be also created in the next few years. And I think that that's the part of this is a very hopeful message, is that when you think of some of the most intractable problems we have, biosphere damage, the whole environmental problem, the polluting of the oceans, the dying off of many species, global poverty, et cetera, and so forth, these are all fixable, completely fixable, but you're not going to fix them with a tanker of oil. So it's an enormous challenge, and it's also a big part of why the secrecy was imposed, because whether it was the 40s and 50s or now, nobody wants to see several $100 trillion in assets that are public utilities, oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, whatever, go the way of all flesh, go the way of royal typewriters or the horse and buggy. But that's what's going to happen. So, but if we don't, here's the issue. If we had done it 60 years ago, the transition would have been much easier. Now we have many more billions of people dependent on a 1800s energy generation system that is choking the life out of Gaia, out of the planet. So we have to get that fixed as well. So this is going to be a very deep dive into it, including part of it's going to be a big expose of what the Lockheed Skunk Works and Northrop Grumman and Boeing and other big contractors for the U.S. government have, and we will show the actual craft and design plan. We have all this, but most people aren't going to go through 200,000 pages of documents, but we'll distill it down. It's a daunting task. It's easier if you have very little information and do a whole documentary or whatever around 3 pieces of information and then a bunch of blather. But when you have the kind of archive we have, it's actually more difficult to put that out there. But that's why I think my vision for this next project would be sort of a pilot feature film documentary that would be the pilot for a whole series, 10, 20, 30 part series. And that's what we're trying to get organized. Of course, my energies are rather absorbed right now with this disaster, with the transition and the outgoing president and the incoming. But that's really what I think needs to happen next. And we're going to be relying on the public and all your good followers to help us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greer, for taking the time tonight to hang out with us on this very important evening. But I need to extend tomorrow night. Have a great, safe New Year's. Our best to Emily.
You too.
And if anything kicks off between now and January 20th, you're back on the show, and you can say, Jimmy, I told you so. There you go.
Yeah, I might give you a heads up if I get, I have my ear to the ground, and you wouldn't believe the people who are texting me who have direct access to the president and vice president and the stuff going on. And what I'm telling people is everything's in play right now. Everything. So say a prayer for peace. Say a prayer that our leaders are guided to do the right thing for humanity, and then we'll have a fantastic 2021.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greer, and we'll circle back after the new year. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your night.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.
You too. Dr. Stephen Greer. And, of course, the website is ce5film.com, and you can follow Dr. Greer on Twitter at Dr. Stephen Greer.